Hey folks, tonight we're kicking off with something not too deep, but definitely interesting food in Wild West saloons. Yeah, those places famous for whiskey, chaotic brawls, and piano music so dull it could put you to sleep. But what did people actually eat? Just beans and bacon? Or was there some surprise behind those swinging doors? So before you get comfy, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you actually dig what I'm doing here, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's tuning in from around the globe. Now dim the lights, turn on the fan for that soothing hum, and let's start tonight's journey. The first thing you smell when you walk into a Wild West saloon isn't the piano or some poor sap losing all his money at cards. It's the smell. Forget the mouth-watering scent of fried steak or fresh cornbread. The real smell punches you right in the nose, a complex mix of sweaty cowboys, wet tobacco, stale beer, damp wood, horses that haven't bathed in a decade, and if you're lucky, a faint hint of something cooking out back. Some saloons try to mask the odor with sawdust on the floor or thick tobacco smoke so dense it wipes your short-term memory. Others just embrace it. You ain't here to breathe the air, the saloon owners would say, swatting flies with a rag so dirty it probably dates back to the Civil War. Yet there's always a stove, maybe a tiny fire pit with beans simmering over coals, or a grumpy woman in a soot-covered apron stirring a mysterious soup with a spoon that doubles as a self-defense weapon. But food was being cooked somewhere, and if you caught a whiff beyond the sweat and booze, you were close to dinner if you could snag a seat. Most saloons weren't fancy like modern restaurants. No waiters, no pretty printed menus, just a few rickety tables, some creaky chairs, and a long bar where you could eat, drink, argue, or do all three at once. If you were a regular, the cook might shout, "Beans or stew," and you'd answer without even looking up. New in town, they'd stare you down, guessing if you'd pay or pass out before the food hit the table. That's what made eating in a saloon special, not taste, but survival. You ate what was there, not what you wanted. You sat next to strangers who might rob you or save your life tomorrow, and if the food gave you a stomach ache, whiskey was there to fix it. In the Wild West food hierarchy, beans ruled not for flavor, but because they were cheap, tough, and could survive the apocalypse, gunfights, and a wild animal stampede without breaking a sweat. Pinto beans, black beans, navy beans didn't matter, as long as they were dry, barely edible, and could be simmered soft. They went in the pot. Beans were the unsung heroes of the saloon kitchen, served breakfast, lunch, and dinner, usually to guys who hadn't seen a green vegetable since leaving Kansas. Cooking was simple. Step 1, dump beans in the pot. Step 2, boil for 6 hours over some questionable fire. Step 3, serve with salted pork fat, stale bread, and a slightly apologetic look. Some chefs tried to fancy it up with lard, onions, or even chili powder if inspiration struck, but mostly, they didn't bother. In the Wild West, flavor was a luxury, and spices just blew in through the open windows. Beans were durable, filling, and predictable, three things cowboys valued more than gold. They fueled long cattle drives, kept poker nights going, and gave you something to chew on while waiting for the piano player to start again or someone to get thrown through a window. The only downside, the aftermath, was one cowboy eating beans was fine. 10 cowboys in a room full of beans. That's biological warfare. They say some fights didn't start with insults, but with a silent but deadly pop near the kitchen. Still, Beans were reliable when meat ran out, when the chicken escaped, and when the cook had only 7 brain cells left, thanks to whiskey. Beans stayed intact, not burnt, not spoiled. Some cowboys even preferred beans. You could eat them cold, reheat endlessly, and even use them as emergency currency. Legend has it, one guy bought a horse with 3 pounds of salted beans and a promise never to come back. So yes, saloon food had its ups and downs, but beans were the foundation, the backbone, the humble heartbeat of thousands of dusty meals. You didn't love them, you respected them, and sometimes that was enough. If beans were the soul of Wild West saloon food, salted pork fat was its slightly gross backbone chunks of fat, and tough meat that could survive storms, bar fights, and 6 months in a saddlebag without changing texture. Salted pork fat isn't bacon, though cowboys like to pretend it was. It's pork belly, heavily salted, often smoked, preserved in barrels with enough brine to season a small ocean. Salt kept it from spoiling and probably made it inedible. Cooked right, salted pork fat was decent enough fried in a hot pan. Crispy, sizzling, it had flavor, grease, and that satisfying crunch that made you forget the rest of the meal came from a salted pork. When it goes bad, which happens way too often, is basically like chewing on salty boot leather dipped in wheel grease. But hey, it's got its fans. It's easy to carry, hard to ruin. No matter how hard people try, it even spices up the blandest pot of beans with a little salty cheer, or at least gives you an excuse to drink more booze. The bartender wastes no fat. It's used to fry everything from potatoes to crackers. While the scraps get tossed into the stew or fed to dogs or unlucky rookies who accidentally eat it, one bite, and they get the bartender's warning, chew slow or you'll choke and have no one to blame but yourself. And yeah, sometimes that pork looks sketchy greenish tint, funky smell, but in a saloon, the motto isn't, is it fresh, but did it kill anyone yet, if not? Dig in. Salted pork's a multitasker. Dice it into beans, sandwich it between crackers, fry it solo, or chew it like jerky on a long ride. Cowboys treasure it like gold, and bartenders rely on it when the chicken bolts or the stew's a bland disaster. Not fancy, not healthy, but in a world where you can ride 60 miles without a hot meal, salted pork's a lifesaver. And if you survive, well, you're tougher already. Out in the Wild West, stew is the great equalizer of grub hot, meaty-ish, and highly suspicious. Nearly every saloon has it, no matter how crappy the kitchen, because stew is the perfect excuse for every weird leftover the cook can't explain. Simple basics, one pot, fire, and ambition. You start with water, maybe beans or potatoes, then toss in whatever hasn't run away. Beef, obviously. Rabbits, sure. Squirrels, 2. Rattlesnakes. If they're no longer biting, just throw 'em in. One traveler claimed to find a shoelace in his bowl. He wasn't mad, said it was the easiest thing to chew. Meat quality varies wildly. Some stews have tender beef from the local butcher. The rest? Well, there's meat, just don't ask what kind. If the cook looks nervous and the local dog population dips, you just nibble around the chewy parts and pray. Veggies, when present, are boiled to oblivion. Carrots are just sad orange smudges. Onions vanish completely, and potatoes hold out longest before finally giving up. The result? A bubbly, grayish-brown mush that smells better than it looks and tastes better than you'd expect if you salted enough. Spices are a luxury, mostly. The stew's heat comes from whatever's stuck to the cook's hands or knife. If you get black pepper, congrats, you're dining fancy. Chili powder, brace yourself. Your sinuses are about to get violently cleaned out, but mysterious as it is, stew comforts the weary cowboy. It's hot, filling, and can stretch forever by just adding water. One pot can feed a dozen folks, or be reheated for 3 days straight until it's as thick and stubborn as old glue. You don't eat stew because it's delicious. You eat it because it's there. It's hot, and there's nothing else unless you're into chewing tobacco and regret. Just remember, never ask what's in it. Because in the Wild West, ignorance isn't just bliss, it's dinner. Not every cowboy can afford steak, but nearly every saloon has some kind of bread to soak up the stew. That bread usually comes in two forms: soft, crumbly biscuits that are heavenly while still warm, or hardtack. Basically, the zombie version of bread. Let's start with biscuits. When done right, rare but divine, they're warm, buttery, and crumbly enough to make any man think he stumbled into a fancy kitchen. A cook who can nail biscuits is a local legend. Some swear by pork fat, others swear by buttermilk. Some probably just got lucky with low standards. These biscuits go great with beans or stew, perfect for soaking up every drop of broth without burning your tongue. Usually cooked in a cast iron pan over a campfire, served with a suspicious dollop of butter or a drizzle of molasses if the saloon's feeling fancy. Now hardtack, that's a dried flour and water slabs, tough enough to survive a nuclear winter, originally made for soldiers and sailors. It's spread to the West thanks to one simple fact: it never goes bad. It's also barely food. Eating hardtack requires strategy. First, check for weevils, not a big deal, just extra crunch. Then soak it in stew, coffee, or booze until soft. Soaking time: anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 presidential terms, even soaked. Chewing hardtack is a battle. You don't just eat it, you wrestle with it. Dentists must have made a fortune off cowboys who took on this challenge and lost. But here's the thing: both biscuits and hardtack do the job. Cheap, portable, filling. In a world where calories trump cuisine, that's all you need. So if you stumble into a dusty saloon and see a steaming plate of biscuits, consider yourself lucky. If they hand you a hard slab the size of your palm, at least it comes with a story and maybe a chipped tooth. And if you think modern coffee's strong, try cowboy coffee, a brew so potent it doesn't just wake you up. It stares you down and dares you to blink. Wild West coffee isn't about savoring, it's about survival. No fancy origin beans, no slick machines, no artsy oat milk foam. It's ground rough, or sometimes not ground at all. They dump water into a pot, boil it until it turned pitch black and looked like it had a mind of its own. The official recipe: grab water from wherever you can, not from the horse trough. Please throw in a handful of coffee, eyeballed with reckless abandon. Then boil it like your life depends on it. No filtering, no questions asked, just pour and pray. What you get is a thick, black brew smelling like burnt dreams and tasting like sweet revenge. Usually, the last sip had more grounds than liquid, meaning the cowboy got his caffeine and his fiber all in one heroic gulp. And yet, they loved it. Coffee kept you warm on those freezing desert mornings, kept you awake through night watches, masked the stench of booze, and helped digest suspicious stews. It was fuel, comfort, and punishment all in one tin cup. Saloons didn't always have coffee unless there was a stove, but when they did, It was boiled fresh, sometimes so old and strong it could peel paint. One cowboy once described it as like getting kicked by a mule, but when it was gone, you missed it like crazy. Fancy folks might add sugar or canned milk if they had it. Everyone else just grimaced and forced it down. If a saloon kept boiling the same pot all day, you got the world's strongest coffee, thick as tar and twice as bitter. Some cooks even reused old grounds to save money. This made for coffee that tasted like regret and disappointment. But hey, out in the Wild West, you didn't drink coffee for fun. You drank it to feel alive and stay that way. In the Wild West, meat wasn't just food, it was currency, status, and sometimes a test of courage. If you had the cash, you could walk into a saloon and order a steak. What you got was pure luck, timing, and whether the cook hated you or not, steak, theoretically, was fancy. Reality? Usually a tough, overcooked slab fried in pork fat, charred to obedience, and utterly lacking any garnish. Ask for medium rare, and the cook would look at you like your beard just turned gray. When fresh beef wasn't around, spoiler alert, usually it wasn't. Saloons switched to other snacks, jerky, salted buffalo meat, sometimes venison, or even wild boar if someone got lucky hunting, which means shooting it and dragging it home before the vultures showed up. In mining towns or remote settlements, the meat got even weirder: squirrel stew, roasted rattlesnake, grilled wild rabbit with spices. If it had legs and wasn't from a guest horse, you could eat it. Sometimes they'd serve you mystery meat without telling you what it was. That was your cue: eat quietly and don't ask questions. If you chewed too long or found something beard-like, just sip some whiskey, nod solemnly, and accept your fate. Then there was the whole age risk. Some meats hung so long they got their own names. The cook would trim off the rotten parts, soak the rest in sauce, and tell you it was well aged. If your plate twitched when you poked it, you were only allowed one raised eyebrow, no more. But when the meat was fresh and the cook sober, you got the real deal: a sizzling steak, topped with a fried egg, maybe a biscuit on the side. A plate that made you understand why folks survived gunfights just for this meal. But most of the time, you ate whatever was on hand and hoped it didn't eat you back. In a Wild West saloon, dessert wasn't really a thing. It was more like a happy accident, a leftover combo, and a dash of mercy from the cook. But if there was one reliable comfort food on the front line, it was cornbread, made from simple cornmeal, water or milk, lard, and sometimes a pinch of baking powder if the cook remembered. Cornbread was the Swiss Army knife of the frontier menu. It could be baked in a pan, fried in a skillet, or even spooned straight into a boiling stew if someone was in a hurry or lazy. On its own, cornbread was dry, crumbly, and kinda sweet depending on who made it, and always best fresh, which was a rare luxury. Usually, you got a piece that had been sitting by the stove since dawn, as hard as a miner's conscience. But here's where the magic happened: molasses. A thick, sticky syrup, black as tar, turned dry cornbread into something almost glorious. It was the cowboy's icing, the outlaw's sauce, the last joy of a lonely gambler before losing it all to a bad hand. Molasses was cheap, survived the heat, and covered up the sins of even the driest cakes. If the saloon had a barrel of molasses, consider yourself lucky. If they warmed it up first, you were basically dining 5-star frontier style. Some cooks went extra, drizzling molasses over fried cornbread and sprinkling a pinch of salt or spice. It wasn't quite dessert, but sure felt like it. After chewing jerky and hard biscuits all week, cornbread with molasses became the default dessert, fast, cheap, filling, and just sweet enough to soothe your nerves after a rough ride or a close call at the poker table. No frosting, no whipped cream, no frills, just roughness, grains, and sticky satisfaction. And for many, that was more than enough, because when your life is cattle drives, dust storms, and random shootouts, dessert doesn't need to sparkle. It just has to remind you that not everything in the West wants to kill you. If you were lucky enough to make it into a saloon before, noon calls for staying sharp and not bleeding out. Maybe you get offered eggs and chicken, and if so, congrats, you're witnessing either a miracle or a trap. Let's start with eggs. Fresh eggs out west were golden, not actual gold, but just as rare and just as fragile. Chickens weren't pets. They were cranky, wandered off, and often got stolen, eaten, or taken out by foxes. If the tavern had eggs, they either raised their own hens, had a local supplier, or ran a shady smuggling ring from the next town over. What kind of eggs? Hopefully chicken eggs, maybe duck, or something weird you learn not to ask. You order eggs, and what you get depends entirely on the cook's mood and how fresh the eggs actually are. Sometimes scrambled to hide the color, sometimes fried until the yolk's as hard as leather, and if your egg jiggles on the plate, that's the universe's way of telling you to order whiskey instead. As for chicken, it's on the menu, but not often. If it says fried chicken, expect a scrawny bird mad enough to die in a rage tough to eat, full of bones, fried in grease until all flavors sucked dry. Chicken isn't always worth chewing. But hey, it's meat. It's still warm, and no longer just beans. So folks eat it with gratitude. You might score a drumstick the size of your thumb or a quarter of a spit-roasted bird, finding a feather in your sauce. Just part of the charm. Eggs and chicken for breakfast is saloon bragging rights, it screams. Hey, we've got food that's not canned or from a barrel. If the eggs are warm and the chicken not dry, you'll be bragging about it for weeks. If you get food poisoning, well, that's the West reminding you who's boss. But hey, there's hope in ordering eggs. It means morning. It means survival. And maybe, just maybe, it means you'll live to drink another round at night in a Wild West saloon. Pie isn't just dessert, it's a statement. Spot a steaming pie on the counter, golden crust, the faint smell of apples mingling with smoke and whiskey. You know this place means business. You also know someone in the kitchen actually gave a damn, which in a land of beans and overcooked pork is basically a love letter. Now, don't get your hopes up too high. Wild West pie isn't some perfect lattice masterpiece with farm-fresh fruit. It's rough, rustic, the crust uneven, filling from canned or dried fruit, usually served lukewarm, whipped cream, only if you've got a cow tagging along into town. The usual suspects are apple, peach, or berries, which covers anything from raisins to whatever barely counts as berries. If the cook is feeling sweet, you might get a dash of cinnamon. If not, it's just crust, sugar, and hope. Pie's a rare treat anyway. Most cowboys haven't seen pie since they left home, and saloons know having pie is a killer selling point. A good slice can pull customers from 2 towns over, and if it's hot and crispy, believe me, someone will threaten to draw on you over the last piece. There are stories, and a few wildly exaggerated legends about poker games ending with gunfire over dessert disputes. Eating the last slice is basically cheating. In a world where men get stabbed over spilled whiskey, pie is practically sacred. Of course, not all pies are created equal. Some are mostly crust, some are experiments, some fillings might have been fruit in a past life. But if luck's on your side, sober cook, hot oven, and fruit that hasn't turned to booze, the pie is unforgettable because out here in the dust and grit of the borderlands, pie isn't just food, it's hope on a tin plate. Cheese in the Wild West is like playing poker, risky, a bit shady, and chances are you'll regret it by morning. It's there, but only if you know where to look. Even then, you gotta be tough. Because cheese isn't shipped in neat wax rounds wrapped in pretty paper. It's made on site, often by someone who read about milk fermentation while drunk. Saloon cheese usually comes in two flavors: hard, yellow, and suspiciously sweaty, or soft, crumbly, and aggressively nose attacking. Refrigerators are a luxury, so unless it's a cold month or the saloon's near a cave, your cheese's personality probably developed on its own. It might be cheddar, something kinda Swiss-like, or a guesswork lump of curds sprinkled with salt. And if it squeaks when you bite, well, that's between you and your jaw. Cheese usually comes in chunks with bread, jerky, or if you're lucky, a pickle. It balances the salt of other grub and packs protein for cowboys between bar brawls. You might even melt it over beans or toast it on cornbread if the cook's feeling artsy. But watch out, some saloons cheat. Cheese can be old rancid butter or curds rolled in pepper to distract you. One wandering trader once claimed he bought cheese at Nevada Cheese, tasting like boiled rubber with a crust. He still ate it because, hey, bad cheese is still cheese out in the Wild West. A saloon with cheese was a big deal. It meant the owner had ties to a local farm, or at least hadn't lost all his cows to rustlers. Cheese wasn't served for flavor, it was showboating. A badge of civilization in a place where folks still bathed in sand. So if you saw a slice on your saloon plate, you'd stare at it, sniff it, tap it with your fork, then eat it anyway because in the West, betting on dinner was just part of the game. If it was pickled in vinegar and forgotten in a jar, chances are it came from a Wild West saloon. Pickles weren't just a flavor choice, they were survival strategy. Before fridges, saloon kitchens relied on brine and sourness to keep food from rotting. Veggies, eggs, fruit, even meat, nothing escaped vinegar's preserving wrath. So yeah, pickled stuff was everywhere. Classic pickles, crunchy, sour, sometimes suspiciously green, served as whiskey snacks or just something to chew on while you made terrible life choices. If you were lucky, they'd be fresh with garlic and spices. If not, they tasted like regret and rainwater. Pickled eggs, saloon staple, you'd spot them bobbing in cloudy jars behind the bar, usually near whiskey. They looked like ghost eyes and felt like sadness in your mouth. Some cowboys swore by them: fast protein, easy to stash, and usually swallowed without complaint. Others cursed them loudly. Pickled onions, common in mining towns, were spicy, sour, and strong enough to shut down any unwanted chit-chat. One bite and you could whisper through the chaos of a bar fight. Even pickled peaches or pears showed up when dried fruit got dunked in sweet brine, creating something weirdly addictive yet confusing. Not exactly dessert, not exactly dinner, just soggy hope with a sour twist. The beauty of pickles was their shelf life. A saloon could keep jars for months, even years. No spoilage worries, and in a place where meat went bad faster than a poker hand, that was priceless. But let's be honest, not all pickles were tasty. Sometimes jars weren't sealed right. Sometimes the cook got experimental. And sometimes the pickles stared back at you. There are tales, maybe exaggerated, of men biting into salted sausages with bones or labels that just said might be pork. Still, pickles were part of the Wild West experience, salty, sour, and oddly satisfying, like everything out there. You didn't eat because you loved it. You ate because maybe it wouldn't kill you when food was scarce, cooks checked out, or the stew looked like it was still beating. Cowboys and drifters all reached for the most reliable thing on the saloon menu: whiskey, always available, no cooking required, and if you drank enough, you'd forget you were hungry or that you just ate a bowl of suspicious squirrel meat stew. Western whiskey wasn't aged in oak barrels or crafted by connoisseurs. It was rough, rude, and sometimes dangerous, made from corn, rye, or whatever the barkeep had lying around. It was distilled in back rooms, stables, and bathtubs. The result, a drink that could clean wounds, strip paint, and fuel a bar fight. Some called it rot gut, others lightning in a bottle, and a few just called it lunch. When beans were burnt and bread moldy, men sipped calories from burning shots. Saloon whiskey wasn't just a drink, it was survival gear. It numbed the dust cough, heartbreak, broken bones, and questionable stew. One shot before a gunfight, two after, maybe three more while waiting to see if that bullet wound was serious. Usually, saloons even threw in whiskey specials with beans, or crackers not for taste, but to keep you upright. Some folks drank whiskey with a pickled egg floating in it, which somehow counted as both hydration and protein. And of course, whiskey was the social glue. You bought it to make friends, start fights, and sometimes apologize for both. You could judge a saloon's rep by how fast the whiskey knocked people off their stools. Quality don't ask. Some whiskey was just moonshine with food coloring and everything from tobacco spit to cayenne pepper tossed in. It burned down your throat. And if it didn't, you were probably drinking kerosene. Nobody complained, though warm, cheap. Honest whiskey was the only menu item that never pretended to be something else. And on nights when your meal came in a glass with no fork and zero judgment, you'd raise that glass and call it dinner. In any Western saloon daring to serve food, there was always one shadowy figure, smoky and powerful enough to rival the bartender. Sheriff and preacher combined the cook, usually unshaven and perpetually grumpy. This person was either a life-saving genius or a culinary war criminal. No middle ground. You'd never see them smile, but you'd remember their food for a week. Whether that meant gratitude or a stomachache was up to you. Saloon cooks weren't professional chefs. They were often ex-miners, freed convicts, or drifters who knew how to start a fire and weren't scared of suspicious meat. Their kitchen a fire pit, a crooked stove, and one cast iron skillet that hadn't been washed since the gold rush. Yet somehow, they kept the saloon fed. On a good day, they could whip up a chili so spicy it made men cry in a good way. Fresh bread, beans soft and tender, sweet cornbread just enough to remind you of home. But on a bad day, beans burnt to a crisp, meat gray and sad, and the stew topped with a weird greasy layer that's still wobbling even though the pot's been sitting still. You don't dare complain, you just can't. The unspoken rule in the saloon is crystal clear. Never insult the cook because they hold all the cards: salt, fat, that mysterious meat ratio. If they like you, you get the freshest cut. If not, Enjoy yesterday's disaster stew reheated into some surprise chili. Oh, and they double as the saloon's reluctant bouncers. Who wants a ladle full of salted meat flying at their face? And if the cook's packing a butcher's knife, which many do, they can clear the whole room faster than a shotgun blast. Whatever their moods, these cooks are essential. They keep cowboys sober, miners awake, and travelers upright through stories. They work all day in heat and smoke, endure endless spicy insults about their seasoning, and follow one rule: don't like it. There's the door or whiskey. So whether they're saviors or saboteurs, you still gotta respect the cook, because out west, they hold your belly and your fate in those greasy, glorious hands. Now, we've stepped through the rickety door, sniffed the stew, and stared down a jar of cloudy pickled eggs. The real question: would you dare eat at a Wild West saloon? Be honest. Your modern taste buds probably can't handle it. Beans are meh, meat's a gamble, and the stew is more mystery than meal. You need strong teeth, a hearty stomach, and hunger like you've been riding a sunburnt horse for 40 dusty miles. But here's the thing, cowboys, miners, gamblers, and lost souls on the American frontier didn't eat for fancy flavors or Instagram-ready plates. This food was fuel, calories, warmth a hot plate in the middle of gunfights, train robberies, or a night sleeping in the barn next to a mule named Regret. It was survival. You didn't ask where the meat came from. You didn't complain about breadcrumbs that felt like chalk. You sat down, ate what you were given, and washed it down with something strong enough to kill bacteria, or at least make you not care anymore. And when the food was good, beans fresh, coffee not biting back, and the cook saved a bit of molasses for the cornbread, that was a miracle. So, if you lived back then, would you eat it? Heck yeah. Not just eat it, you'd be grateful. Lick your plate clean, wipe your dish with a breadcrumb, and call for seconds with a coin still smelling like gunpowder and horse sweat. You'd smile at strangers, curse the cook, raise your whiskey, and maybe, just maybe, end the night with a slice of pie and a decent story, because saloon food wasn't glamorous. It was rough, greasy, and real, and in a world where the West was still wild, that was enough. Before tattoos covered arms and backs in trendy shops buzzing with needles, they were something way older, etched not for fashion, but for mystery, meaning, and survival. Let's rewind to before cities existed, before gods had names, when humans lived almost naked in spirit and skin. Meet the Iceman, discovered in 1991, frozen in a glacier between Austria and Italy. His mummy is over 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, but on that weathered skin. Researchers found something super modern: tattoos, exactly 61 of them. Not fancy spirals or stylized animals. These were black charcoal marks, dots, and lines running down his spine, behind his knees, and around his ankles. Here's where it gets crazy. Ötzi's tattoos line up exactly with known acupuncture points. Could this be an ancient form of pain relief, an old-school healing technique, or something more spiritual, a ritual of endurance carved right into flesh? We'll never know for sure. But one thing's clear: way back in the Stone Age, humans were marking their bodies with purpose, and Ötzi wasn't alone. In ancient Egypt, tattoos mostly appeared on women, including priestesses and dancers, not butterflies or ex-boyfriend names, but symbolic designs, often around the belly, thighs, and chest. Some scholars believe these tattoos were meant healing technique, or maybe something more spiritual, a ritual of endurance carved straight onto the skin. We'll never know for sure. But one thing's clear: since the Stone Age, humans have been marking their bodies with purpose. And Otzi wasn't the only one. In ancient Egypt, tattoos were mostly on women, including nuns and dancers. Not butterflies or X's names, but symbolic designs, usually around the belly, thighs, and chest. Some scholars believe these tattoos were meant to protect during childbirth, convey fertility, or ward off evil spirits, a kind of spiritual armor painted right on the skin. Even in Nubia, south of Egypt, archaeologists found mummies with animal tattoos on limbs, bulls, crocodiles, symbols of power and survival. Across these early societies, tattoos weren't rebellious acts. They were respect, resilience, and ritual. They meant more than ink. They meant pain, permanence, and belief. Next time you see someone tattooed to the eyeballs at the gym or on the subway, remember they're part of a tradition that didn't start in a studio, but in freezing cold, dusty deserts, and the sacred silence of millennia forgotten. If you think tattoos are just cool accessories or rebellion, try saying that to a Polynesian chief. Guaranteed the room goes dead silent. In Polynesian culture, tattoos aren't optional or just decoration, they're sacred. In fact, the word tattoo comes from the Tahitian tetau, meaning to strike. And yes, tattoos start with bone tools, dipped in charcoal, rhythmically tapped on skin with sticks, each strike echoing centuries of tradition in places like Samoa, Tonga, and especially the Maori of New Zealand. Tattoos there aren't just art, they're identity. Moko, the complex facial tattoos of the Maori, tell you everything you need to know: status, family, ancestors, even personal achievements. The face isn't just a canvas, it's a living resume. And erasing it is like wiping out a man's entire life. Young men get their first tattoos in painful rites of passage. This isn't a Friday night decision after a few drinks. It's a spiritual transformation. Extreme pain, no anesthesia, no numbing cream, just raw courage and a shared belief in the deep meaning behind the pain. Women also tattoo, often on lips, chin, or thighs, symbols of beauty, maturity, and mana, the sacred power believed to flow through all living things. A woman without tattoos might be seen as incomplete, a blank canvas in a world full of stories. But colonialism, as usual, tried to erase it all. Missionaries came with scissors, soap, and shame. They saw tattoos as crude, pagan, and totally un-Christian. In some places, traditional tattooing got banned, forced underground like a secret sacred language, whispered only in shadows. Yet the ink survived today. Many Polynesians proudly reclaim their tattoo heritage. Ancient tools are making a comeback, designs are reappearing, and across the Pacific, the sound of the tatau echoes again, not just art, but a cultural survival act. Tattoos aren't just marks on skin, they're, and always have been, declarations of spirit, blood, and belonging. Step into the world of tattoo artists, warriors, and philosophers, and you'd never guess you'd find tattoos here. When you think ancient Greece and Rome, you picture marble statues and spotless skin. Right, but peel back the myth, and you find ink hiding in the shadows in ancient Greece. Tattoos were first linked to slaves and criminals. Fun fact, the Greek word stigma, yes. The root of our modern stigmatize meant permanent marks, branded or tattooed as punishment. Not decoration, not a badge of honor, but a scarlet letter screaming beware. If you were a runaway slave or captured enemy, your captors might tattoo your forehead with a message like "Don't run, I caught you," a blazing red letter burned into your skin. The Romans, ever the practical crowd, borrowed this idea and cranked it up a notch. Roman soldiers, especially in elite units, often got tattoos marking their loyalty like a dog tag, but way less shiny. They also tattooed gladiators, slaves, and prisoners of war, not for ID, they wanted to brand their ownership. Here's a darker twist: early Christians, persecuted by Rome, sometimes got tattooed as a form of humiliation. But centuries later, Christians flipped the script. Medieval pilgrims returning from Jerusalem often sported tiny crosses tattooed on their hands, a badge of faith and suffering. What started as punishment became a holy honor, ironically, in late Roman times. Emperor Constantine, the guy who legalized Christianity, banned face tattoos, not because he was a jerk, but because he claimed faces were made in God's image and shouldn't be defaced. The irony: your body was still fair game, unlike Polynesia, where tattoos boosted your social clout. In Greco-Roman worlds, tattoos were social poison. They marked you as an outcast, sinner, or slave. But they did tell a story, not always one you'd want to share, but one you had to wear for life, in an empire ruled by law, war, and showmanship. Tattoos weren't self-expression. They were signs, sometimes literal scars of control, punishment, and power, and like all marks of oppression, eventually, they'd be reclaimed, while the West branded slaves and criminals. The East took a spiritual artsy route, where tattoos were both amulets and social puzzles. Let's start with India. India's famous for Mendi temporary henna art for weddings and festivals, but it's also got an ancient permanent tattoo tradition in tribes like Baiga, Gond, and Santhal. Tattoos weren't just decoration, they were protection. A woman might get symbols of fertility, strength, or devotion, not on a whim, but passed down from grandma to granddaughter. These tattoos weren't just pretty, they were soul jewelry things no theft could snatch and no poverty could steal. Meanwhile, in Japan, things get more complicated. During the Jomon period, tattoos might have had spiritual meaning, marked status, or scared off evil spirits. But as Japan moved into more orderly times, especially the Edo period, tattoos took on a whole new vibe. First up, punishment. Criminals got slapped with tattoos on their faces, or hands declaring their crimes, and hometowns permanently branding them as untrustworthy. Imagine strolling into a village where everyone reads your dirty laundry right off your skin. But then, something cool happened. An underground culture blossomed. Society's rejects firefighters, manual laborers, and later, Yakuza members didn't see tattoos as shame but as pride. They created full-body masterpieces called irizumi, often dragons, tigers, and mythical heroes. This masterpiece was etched into skin over hundreds of painful hours. Each design telling a story, a personal legend carved deep under society's judging eyes. Meanwhile, Southeast Asian Buddhists developed sakyant tattoos, geometric designs, and mantras believed to bring protection, power, and spiritual blessings. These tattoos were done by monks using sharp bamboo or steel, always accompanied by chanting and prayers. In the East, tattoos could be sacred or taboo, holy or criminal. It all depends on who's getting inked and why. But one thing's certain in these cultures: skin never stays quiet. It speaks of power, punishment, prayers, and pride. When the Roman Empire gave way to Christianity, the tattoo needle once a symbol of identity or punishment, started disappearing from the Western world, because in the church's eyes, the body was no longer just flesh, it was a temple, and temples, apparently, aren't for doodling. Early Christians had a complicated relationship with tattoos. On one hand, some groups used tattoos as faith statements. Pilgrims to Jerusalem would tattoo tiny crosses on their wrists to show devotion, a permanent spiritual passport. These were badges of endurance and survival, proof they made it through a holy journey to tell the tale. But that was the exception, not the rule, by the early Middle Ages. The religious message was clear, marking the body was pagan, and pagan meant sinful, the Bible. Especially Leviticus 19:28 was often quoted, "Do not cut your bodies for the dead, or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord." That line was enough to bury an entire art form. Across most of medieval Europe, tattoos became symbols of heresy, witchcraft, and blasphemy. Nobody wanted to touch that. During the witch hunts and heresy trials, in monasteries and Christian kingdoms, tattoos almost vanished, reduced to rumors and superstition. But even in this dark age, tattoo ink never fully dried up. In the far corners of the Byzantine Empire, some Christian sects still practiced religious tattooing, marking small crosses on hands and arms, often to protect against Muslim slaves. In Ethiopia, Coptic believers kept the tradition alive, marking youth with sacred symbols in spiritual ceremonies. And among the Crusaders, those marching to the Holy Land tattoos made a quiet comeback. Some inked small crosses on their bodies, not just for spiritual protection, but so if they died in battle, they'd be buried as Christians, their faith marked even in death. So while medieval Europe tried to erase tattooing, it never quite succeeded. Tattoo ink lurked in monasteries, on pilgrimage routes, and desert churches, patiently waiting like a buried treasure for its day to return. When the age of discovery kicked off and wooden ships sailed uncharted oceans, tattoos found a new canvas sailors, and these weren't court artists or tribal shamans. These were rough, salt-crusted, superstitious guys decorating their bodies with anchors, mermaids, and crosses. But how did tattoos make their way back to Europe after centuries of exile? Let's talk about the 18th century voyages of Captain James Cook. When his crew landed in Polynesia, they met societies covered head to toe in ink, curious and impressed. Many sailors got tattooed too, partly out of respect for local culture, partly to brag they'd been somewhere cool. Coming back to port with tattoos wasn't just a trend, it was a walking resume, marking where you'd been and what you survived. Soon enough, tattoos became the unofficial uniform of sailors, but it wasn't just style, it was loaded with superstition. An anchor on the arm symbolized stability. Pigs and roosters, usually tattooed on the legs, were believed to prevent drowning because these animals were often kept in floating crates when ships sank. Some even tattooed "hold fast" on their knuckles, hoping it'd help them grip tight when the sea got rough and ropes tangled. Then there were religious tattoos, crosses on the back, the Virgin Mary on the chest. Sailors believed these tattoos gave them divine protection, a spiritual armor against the ocean's fury. When these inked-up sailors returned to European and American ports, tattoos spread with them not to the nobles, but to the working-class dock workers, soldiers, and convicts. Tattoos became the language of laborers, drifters, and daredevils. But it wasn't just rebellion, it had meaning. During the American Civil War, soldiers began tattooing their names and units on their arms, prepping for the grim possibility of death and needing ID, a painful kind of insurance without a dog tag. So while kings and clerics stayed clear of tattoos, the men who mapped the world wore them with pride. Each ink mark told a story, a wound, a charm, a prayer, and when the world ended in waves or cannon fire, it might be the only thing left with your name on it by the 19th and 20th centuries. Tattoos had left temples and tribal rituals behind. In many places, they became badges of defiance, especially in prison. Jails created a new tattoo language: rough, coded, told with needles, razors, and homemade ink, starting in Russia, under the iron fist of the Soviet Union. A secret tattoo society grew inside. Gulag labor camps, these aren't just decorations. They're brutal resumes, badges, and rank insignias. A star on your shoulder means you're respected, barbed wire wrapped around your neck. Congrats, you're a lifer, no parole for you. A church dome tattooed on your chest. Each dome stands for a sentence served. Tattoos spill your crimes, rank, and defiance. Break the rules or wear the wrong badge. They shave it all off with a razor. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Yakuza turned the Irizumi art form, once a punishment, into badges of honor: dragon armor, koi fish, samurai ink from shoulders to ankles, usually hidden under a business suit. Tattoos aren't just rebellion, they're loyalty rituals, painful, pricey, and forever. Over in the West, prison tattoos have their own language. In U.S. jails, a teardrop under the eye might mean you killed someone or lost a close one. A spider web on the elbow, that's a long sentence. Dots on finger joints, numbers, acronyms, your whole identity rewritten in ink, hidden from guards but crystal clear to insiders. These tattoos are done with hidden sewing needles, paper clips, and melted ballpoint ink. No glam, just pain and meaning. For many prisoners, it's not art, it's identity, the proof you belong, or a warning you don't. Outside prison walls, these inks carry heavy stigma. They mark you as dangerous, untouchable, and beyond redemption, but for those who wear them. Tattoo ink is the one thing that never changes, the only piece of themselves left in a system that tries to take everything else. Prison tattoos aren't fashion statements, they're survival. By the 20th century's full throttle, tattoos flipped from sacred symbols and criminal codes to mainstream rebellion. If churches once saw tattoos as marks of sin, modern society started to see them as symbols of freedom and sometimes a seriously cool style. Early 1900s, you could still catch tattooed circus performers, tattooed ladies, and inked up gents, charging crowds to flaunt their inked skin. People gawked, stared wide-eyed. It was taboo wrapped in a show. But things started shifting mid-century. Wubba-woo vets came home, sporting simple tattoos: anchors, eagles, hearts with mom inside, personal badges of pain, patriotism, or survival. These tattoos weren't for show. They were souvenirs etched into flesh, reminders of what they'd seen and the brothers they lost. Then came the 60s and 70s counterculture wave. Tattoos jumped out of the working class onto rock stars, bikers, and beat poets. Janis Joplin had a bracelet tattoo on her wrist. Hell's Angels wore ink like medals of honor. Tattooing, still a bit wild in polite society, became a rebellious act. A way to say, I don't give a damn what you think. What about tattoo shops? No more shady holes and dark alleys. They cleaned up, got legit. Artists like Lyle Tuttle, who inked Cher and the Rolling Stones, turned tattoo needles into paintbrushes. Suddenly, tattoos weren't just symbols. They became statements: personal, political, powerful, but the stigma didn't disappear overnight. Even into the 90s and early 2000s, flashy tattoos could get you rejected at job interviews. Visible tattoos, nope, was often written right on application forms. Ink still whispered crime, difference, or risk, especially for women who got judged even harder. But hey, the tide was turning. Tattoo shows hit TV screens. Celebs went full sleeve. Tattoo conventions popped up everywhere, like mushrooms after rain. This art stopped being underground. It went mainstream, from rebellion to runway. Tattoos finally made it back to the spotlight, but they never forgot their roots. In a world where everything from your voice to memories live in the cloud, you think something old school like tattoos would fade away. Nope. Tattoos are having a renaissance, not just surviving the digital age, but evolving with it. Today, tattoos aren't just ink and skin, they're backed by apps, boosted by tech, and designed by machines that'd make 19th century sailors scream. Some artists now use AI to craft insanely detailed designs. Others work with printers that put ink down as precisely as a surgeon's scalpel. And then there are smart tattoos, experimental patches with sensors tracking health, controlling devices, even glowing with LED ink. Not sci-fi labs are testing this stuff right now, but tech or no tech, tattoos are booming. What used to be taboo is now celebrated across professions, genders, and cultures. Doctors with full sleeves, teachers sporting inked bracelets, CEOs stepping into boardrooms with giant tattoos hidden under their suits. Social media democratized the art. A tattoo in Seoul can go viral in Seattle. Artists build global followings overnight. Clients booking sessions with a tap. And the meaning behind tattoos, it's never gone. If anything, it's gotten more personal. People ink voice waveforms of loved ones, coordinates of where they met their soulmate, portraits of pets, the constellation from the night she was born, a quote carved in a forgotten language to remember, to heal, to belong. Tattoo culture is making a comeback. Indigenous communities from the Arctic to the Andes are reviving ancestral designs, reclaiming identity through skin. What was once suppressed is now worn with pride, a walking reminder. Of course, debates flare up. Is it art or just a trend, sacred or shallow? Do you really own your story when it's filtered through algorithms and likes? But maybe that's the point. Tattoos always live in the gray area between pain and beauty, eternity and change. They're both ancient and futuristic, whispers from the past and declarations for tomorrow. And as long as humans crave meaning, memory, and marks to prove they existed, tattoos will endure. Beneath the skin, the ink will always speak even when words can't. Before empires clashed and blood stained the sands, before kings trembled at her name, Tomoyas was just a girl of the wind, born on wild steppes. The land she came from wasn't marble palaces or echoing philosophies. It was raw, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the Masajte, fierce nomadic archers, riding like the very soul of the plains. Their lives revolved around survival, honor, and war. We know little about Tomias's childhood, but can imagine its rhythm. She learned to ride before she could run, to shoot before she spoke in full sentences. In Masajte society, girls weren't locked in tents or silenced. They trained alongside boys, rode with warriors, and grew up with steel in their veins. To lead, you had to know bloodshed, and Tomias, though young, already shed blood for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky. lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready to fight in the afterlife. No cities, no golden temples, but fierce pride, and when enemies came close, they didn't pray they shot arrows back. Tomias may have risen to power after her husband died, the one who might have ruled the tribe before her. But here's the thing: when the moment came, she didn't inherit power, she seized it. In a time when most women were seen as property, Tomias led armies, negotiated with kings, and dared to speak as an equal. If they didn't listen, she made them listen. She wasn't just a queen, she was Shahut the checkmate on the steppe, a war leader of bronze and leather, gearing up to face the largest empire on earth. But power, especially for women, never arrives without a price. As Tomias started to consolidate her rule, whispers spread over the southern mountains. A king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set, the steppe winds howled, and Tomias, daughter of warriors, was about to ride into legend. Meanwhile, Tomias ruled the vast steppes. Far south, another kind of power was rising, organized, imperial, and ruthless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had conquered Lydia to the west and Babylon to the south. His flag flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and builders always look to the horizon. For Cyrus, the Massagetæ were both a threat and an opportunity. They had no gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern border, which meant holding valuable lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, the Massagetæ had something no empire dared ignore: pride. And pride, in Cyrus's eyes, could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew brute force wasn't always the best first move. He was famous for wisdom, diplomacy, and strategic trickery. So he tried another tactic one kings before him used to neutralize threats without spilling a drop of blood. He proposed marriage, according to ancient sources, especially Herodotus. Cyrus sent envoys to Tomias, offering an alliance through marriage. On paper, it was a royal match: the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Massagetæ. But Tomias wasn't naive. She saw right through that offer, not a love letter or partnership, but a scheme to swallow her people whole without fighting. She said no, and that refusal wasn't welcome in Persepolis when diplomacy failed. Cyrus switched to his favorite language war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural border between Persia and Massagetæ lands. He intended to take what Tomias refused to give, but Tomias was ready. She knew the terrain, knew how her people fought fast, fierce horseback archers, and most importantly, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He came to crush a woman who dared to say no. The most powerful king on earth declared war, unaware of the storm just waking on the steppe. Cyrus the Great, master strategist and battle-hardened conqueror, thought he could outsmart her. He'd faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massagetæ were just wild nomads with fast horses and no fortresses. He didn't realize he was walking into the path of someone far wiser and angrier. Tomias warned him after refusing the proposal. She sent a clear message: cross the Araxes, and you'll regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building pontoon bridges to get his troops into Massagetæ land instead of fighting right away. Tomias pulled back, baiting Cyrus deeper into strange terrain. The Persians stumbled on an abandoned camp full of food and, more importantly, wine a rare luxury for the nomadic massage tay. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus bit, probably thinking the enemy had fled in panic. He left part of his troops under the trusted officer Harpagus. When the massage tay returned under cover of night, they attacked the drunken, unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was bloody and quick. Among the dead was Spargapices. Spargapices was Tomyris's son and the massage tay commander. Stories differ on what happened next. Some say he was captured, begged to die, and killed himself. Others say he died in battle, but everyone agrees. When Tomyris heard the news, something inside her shattered and turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This time, no warning, just a vow. You may be bloodthirsty, she said, but I swear I'll drown you in blood. She promised to paint the ground red with Persian blood, and her revenge would not be quiet. Cyrus took her son. He violated her land. Now he wouldn't face the massage tay queen, but a mother of a fallen warrior, and the last face he'd ever see. The next battle wasn't just a fight, it was a death sentence. The sun rose over the steppe like a knife, sharp and blinding. Tomyris led her army, no longer just a queen, but a living storm. Her warriors, toughened by nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and fury. This wasn't politics anymore. This was blood. Cyrus, powerful as he was, had underestimated the massage tay. He thought they'd fight like the tribes he'd conquered before, chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tomyris had lived among warriors all her life. She knew how to strike not blindly, but with deadly precision. She rallied her troops for a full-on assault against the Persians, holding nothing back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vast steppe, but it's clear Tomyris unleashed a brutal counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a wave of blades. They shot arrows on horseback, charged with axes, and fought like they had nothing left to lose. The Persians, tough, disciplined, and battle-hardened, never expected such organized fury. Tomyris didn't just command, she fought alongside them. Her presence on the battlefield lit a fire under her warriors. Every strike was revenge. Every charge answered her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold firm, but the formation shattered completely. The Persians were utterly crushed. Many died on the spot. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the guy who conquered Babylon, Lydia, and just about the known world went down in that chaos. Did he die in battle or get captured and executed? Depends on who you ask. But either way, his death came on Tomyris's terms. The next part is pretty famous, according to Herodotus. Tomyris found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head cut off, then in one last symbolic act of revenge, dunked it into a bag filled with human blood. Drink up, drink your fill of bloodlust, she said. Real history, or just dramatic flair, maybe both. But who cares? The message was eternal. Tomyris wasn't someone you crushed. When the dust settled and the grass soaked up imperial blood, Tomyris stood victorious, a warrior queen who did what no king or army before her could. She ended the life of Cyrus the Great. The news of defeat spread across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought invincible, was humiliated by a woman from the steppe. The Persians tried to downplay the loss, but drink up. Drink to your thirst for blood, she said. True story or poetic license? Maybe both. Doesn't matter, the message lasts forever. Tomyris wasn't someone anyone could just crush. When the dust settled and the grass soaked up imperial blood, Tomyris stood victorious, a warrior queen who did what no king or army before her could. She ended the life of Cyrus the Great. Word of his defeats spread across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, once thought invincible, was humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians tried to spin the loss, but the death of their founder couldn't be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually brought back and buried with royal honors in Pasargadae. But the stain of defeat remained a wound on the empire's legacy for Tomyris and the Massagetæ tribe. That victory wasn't just revenge, it was a statement. They defended their sovereignty not just with weapons, but with dignity. Tomyris faced the most powerful king in the world, and she didn't just survive, she won. Then she vanished from history. No records remain of her final years, her death, or any achievements she might have scored. It's like, once the grudge was settled, Tomyris just rode off into the sunset and let the wind erase her legend. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and scribes tried to fill the void, turning her into more of a symbol than a real person. To the Persians, her name was a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, a savage who somehow had more dignity than most kings. And to the Central Asians, Tomyris became a legend, a fierce, wild queen galloping across the steppes, untamable and relentless, with a sword that never forgot. Her legacy inspired countless images across cultures. Medieval manuscripts deck her out in royal armor. Renaissance paintings picture her towering over Cyrus's corpse. Across the ages, she became whatever people needed: a mother, an avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in pride, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth slices through all the myths: she changed history. Tomyris didn't inherit her throne. She forged it in fire and fury, and in that brief, unforgettable moment, the steppe, Queen Tomyris proved that not every empire rises. Some get trampled under the hooves of horse-riding warriors, fueled by burning vengeance. Most of what we know about Tomyris doesn't come from local Mesopotamian records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek, Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing about her a century later, he immortalized Tomyris in his tales, turning her into a warrior queen with iron will and terrifying revenge. But Herodotus wasn't just reporting facts. He was spinning a story, part chronicle, part morality play. To him and his Greek audience, Tomyris was the ultimate flip of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, conqueror of half the world, didn't fall to a mighty army or rival king, but to a woman fighting not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythical, and Herodotus told it that way. He even detailed the gruesome revenge: a blood-filled wineskin, Cyrus's severed head, and her killer toast, "Drink up." But was it real? Modern historians debate endlessly. Some say Herodotus exaggerated or outright made up parts, using Tomyris as a storytelling tool to take down the Persian Empire. Still a beast to the Greeks in his day, others believe that even if the blood bag scene is symbolic, the core event, the death of Cyrus at Tomyris's hands, likely happened. There's also bias to consider. Herodotus, brilliant as he was, often saw foreign cultures through Greek-colored glasses. He described the Massagetæ tribe as wild but free-spirited yet noble, a weird mirror, reflecting Greek ideals of honor and liberty. In that frame, Tomyris wasn't just a savage. She was the moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Details may have blurred over time, But Herodotus nailed one thing he made sure Tomyris wouldn't be forgotten. Thanks to him, she's not just a footnote in history. She stepped into legend, where truth is soft, but impact is sharp, and in that blurry space between myth and memory. Tomyris's story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world ruled by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us with a queen who refused to kneel and let her enemy bleed out on the sand. Maybe she killed one of the ancient world's most legendary emperors. But Tomyris never ruled an empire herself. No stone fortresses built, no royal decrees etched in gold. Her people, the Massagetæ, were nomads living to the rhythm of sky, earth, and horse, not walls. That means Tomyris's legacy isn't organized. No marble statues or royal coins bear her face. No archives grant her immortality. Decrees instead. Her story was passed down, like all good campfire tales across the steppe, by firelight, song, and the whispered awe of warriors. The Massagetæ were one of many fierce tribes roaming Central Asia's grasslands, related to the Saka, Scythians, and Dahai. All were deadly horse archers, wandering between the Caspian Sea and ancient China's borders. These tribes terrified empires with their speed, unpredictability, and battlefield ruthlessness. Tomyris, as a female leader, was rare but not unique. Steppe culture, unlike many settled civilizations, gave women way more freedom. Women rode horses, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, archaeologists have found graves of female warriors buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear, proving the fierce steppe queens weren't just legends. Tomyris stood at the peak of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and pure capability. She was the glue uniting scattered tribes, a political leader and military commander in a place where survival meant riding faster, shooting truer, and only fearing one thing, death. Because the Massagetæ left no monuments, Tomyris became a ghost queen, her name echoing only in foreign records and oral traditions on the steppe. To Persian historians, she was a warning to the Greeks, a wonder, and to her people, probably a memory flowing in their blood, and war songs a ghost riding alongside them across the vast fields. Empires rise and fall like stone, but steppe stories live forever in the wind. And Tomyris, fierce, tragic, and unbowed, became its voice. Centuries passed, empires. The Massagetæ's world rose and fell around her. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, then faded into dusty footnotes of history. But for her, the legend lived on not in royal palaces, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow down. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She was a symbol of female power, resistance, and the untamable wild spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tomyris embodied rebellion beyond borders. She wasn't Roman, Greek, or Persian, so her story didn't belong to any empire. That made her both dangerous and inspiring in the medieval Islamic worlds. Chroniclers occasionally mentioned her twisting her name in their tongues, but never forgetting her. In some versions, she's praised for justice and vengeance. In others, a savage queen reminding everyone that power in women can be glorious and terrifying. By the Renaissance, European artists rediscovered her story through Herodotus's notes. They painted her in elaborate armor, standing victorious next to, in a dramatic painting, the lifeless body lay on the ground as she held up the severed head of Cyrus like a bloody trophy, messy and majestic. Pretty epic. right but also heavy on the political messaging. Those artists were obsessed with the idea of a woman not just surviving in a man's world, but winning. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries. Tamiris became a national icon in places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators so reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proving Central Asian roots are fierce, proud, and undeniably feminine. Her name popped up in textbooks, statues, even military ceremonies. A woman who once ruled horseback with a bow in hand now galloped through memory and myth, through revolts and pride, in a world still wrestling with the idea of powerful women. Tamiris remains a challenge. She's no saint, no sweet mother figure. She's decisive, ruthless when needed, kind only to those deserving. She's resistance in human form, and the empire's blood on her hands is a crown she wears with zero regrets. History usually favors monument builders, lawmakers, and kings who carve their names in stone. Tamiris did none of that. She left no empire, no palaces for archaeologists to dig, no royal seals to decode. Yet her name lives on not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She's a paradox in how history often remembers women not as sidekicks or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tamiris didn't beg for recognition. She took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one and won. Her story is told in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not just because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She didn't protect an empire. She protected freedom, a freedom that galloped on horseback, hunted with eagles, and slept under stars, a freedom too wild to be boxed on any map. Today, her statue stands in Kazakhstan's capitals, her face on coins and textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she's the mother of nations, a link to a proud nomadic past predating Islam and the Soviet Union, reminder that their identity wasn't born from submission, but from battle cries and thundering hooves. In a world still divided by power, gender, and memory, Tamiris is a beacon, not just because she killed a great king, but because she teaches us something bigger. Dignity isn't given, it's taken. Sometimes, leadership looks like a mother's fierce grief and refusal to let her child's killer go free. We often wonder why some names survive history while others vanish. Tamiris survived because she couldn't be forgotten, because at a time women were expected to disappear into men's tents. She stood up, sword in hand, fury in her heart, carving her story into the flesh of history. Empires fell, monuments crumbled, but the legend galloped on, and somewhere in the winds sweeping the steppe, the queen still rides, unbowed, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable, before locks and CCTV. People only had one simple worry: how to keep their stuff safe from nosy neighbors, wandering beasts, and greedy thieves. As human society shifted from nomadic bands to settled civilization, possessions piled up, and with possessions came problems: jealousy, theft, and the need for protection. The instinct to guard what's precious is ancient and primal. When humans started storing food, tools, or sacred items in fixed homes or temples, they had to figure out how to keep others out, but how to guard forever. The answer: invent a mechanism to protect for you. The earliest known mechanical security effort comes from ancient Egypt. About 4,000 years ago. What's mind-blowing isn't just that they had locks, but that the basic principle behind that invention is still used today. The Egyptian wooden pin lock. It's a marvel of early engineering. It used a wooden bolt with tiny holes and matching wooden pins. When the right key, usually a big wooden tool with matching pins, was inserted, the pins lifted, letting the bolt slide open the door. Pull the key out, and gravity drops the pins back in place, locking it up. Not some toy. These locks guarded storerooms, tombs, or even temple gates. They were mounted along doors, usually on the inside, making tampering a real pain. Almost sure, by today's standards, it looks pretty crude. But the cleverness of the system lies in its simple logic. These weren't just barriers, they were puzzles, and like any good puzzle, they tested uninvited guests. More than that, these locks reveal something deeper about their makers. They weren't just scared of thieves, they were ahead of the game. They thought ahead. They invested time and skill to protect what mattered, laying the groundwork for a whole new human invention: security. So next time you lock your door, remember you're not just flipping a latch, you're continuing a tradition started by ancient hands. Driven by a timeless truth, some things are worth keeping safe. The Egyptian wooden pin lock isn't just the oldest known lock in the world, it's the ancestor of nearly every pin tumbler mechanism today: simple, elegant, and surprisingly effective. It guarded temples, homes, and storehouses all across ancient Egypt for centuries. And it all started with a few pieces of wood, a smart design, and a deep need for privacy. Picture a big wooden door, no hinges like today's doors, more like a plank inside the doorway. There's a horizontal wooden bolt sliding to block entry, but inside that bolt are several small holes, each holding a wooden pin. These pins fall into grooves on the door frame, stopping the bolt from sliding open. Doors locked. Now for the magic: the key, a big wooden tool that looks like a modern toothbrush with pins matching the ones inside the bolt. Stick the key in, and the pins inside get pushed up just enough to clear the grooves on the door frame. Once lifted, the bolt slides open like a charm. Pull the key out, and gravity does the rest. The pins drop back into the grooves on the door frame, locking it tight. This is mechanical memory without springs or gears, just wood, weight, and some cleverness. What makes this system impressive is the balance between complexity and reliability. It's pretty easy to make with available materials, but tough to crack without the right key. And since each lock was handmade, keys weren't interchangeable. Your lock was your lock. These pin locks weren't just for the rich or royalty. Archaeological finds in places like Nineveh and later sites in Persia and Assyria show this idea spread through ancient civilizations. Egypt might have invented it, but locks went beyond just practical use. They carried symbolic power in tombs and sacred buildings. Locks weren't just about physical protection, they were about reverence, finality, the belief that some things should stay untouched unless you earned the key. Security in ancient Egypt wasn't just a function, it was a statement. While Egypt gave us the first mechanical locks, ancient Mesopotamia cooked up a totally different kind of security, less about mechanisms and more about ID, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Security wasn't about bolts and latches, it was about stamping symbols, power, and trust into clay. The people of Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkad, Chius, Babylon, and Assyria developed ways to protect property, not by locking it, but by making unauthorized access obvious. How with cylinder seals, tiny stone stamps carved with unique images or writing. They'd roll these seals onto soft clay to seal jars, doors, or even official documents. Think of it as an ancient combo of signature, wax seal, and barcode, once stamped in clay. It made a continuous pattern that was tough to fake. Anyone who broke the seal, opened the jar, unlatched the door, or cracked the clay tablet got caught red-handed. The broken clay was the tattletale. It's simple but brilliant. In a world without locks or alarms, they focused on prevention through exposure. The seal didn't stop you from opening something. It just shouted to the world that you already did. High officials, merchants, priests all had their own seals, passed down through generations. Seals were so prized some folks were even buried with them, as status symbols and tools for the afterlife. But Mesopotamian security wasn't just clay. They also protected temple and grain stores with ropes that could only be undone by cutting, often tied in fancy knots or sealed to spot sabotage. Same idea, make the risk of getting caught way scarier than the reward of stealing. The concept of security as responsibility linking access to identity and social status echoed through millennia. Today, we still log in with usernames, verify with signatures, and rely more on records than locks. In Mesopotamia, protection wasn't just about hiding, and it was basically a public announcement of who got to touch what. As Greek city-states got richer and fancier, personal security became a thing, from temple vaults to coin hoards and private homes. The Greeks faced the same old problem. How do you keep your stuff safe when you can't babysit it 24/7? Surprisingly, they were slower than Egypt and Mesopotamia to develop mechanical locks. Instead, they leaned heavily on trust, social norms, and physical barriers, sometimes with simple but clever gadgets. One such invention was the bolt and latch lock, mostly for doors and chests. It had a horizontal bar inside the door with a hole to slide a key through and lift the bar. The key, usually a big, flat iron rod shaped like an F or P, not exactly subtle. One was nearly as long as your forearm. Carrying that around basically screamed, "I've got something worth protecting." But Greek keys and locks weren't just practical, they were cultural symbols. Being handed the key was a sign of power and responsibility. In Homer's Odyssey, Penelope holds Odysseus's storeroom key, a symbol of household authority. Still, Greek locks were basic, crude, easy to break, and more about size than finesse. Real security came from hiding stuff well, guards, and community expectations. In temples and state vaults, rooms were sealed with cords and wax, often needing multiple officials present to open the sacred stash. Homes had layers of access, lots of rooms, few exits, and gates that locked from the inside. Wealthy folks hired slaves or guards to watch valuables, adding a human security layer on top of simple mechanical devices. Greeks loved cleverness metas, that sly intelligence, but they didn't quite apply it to locks like later civilizations. Yet they laid down the cultural groundwork keys meant. Status. Access was about trust and security, and there was a balance between power and social control. If Egypt gave us the idea of bolt locks, and Greece mixed in trust and tradition, Rome took locks to a whole new level of practical art, with metalworking skills, obsession with order, and a massive bureaucracy. Romans brought precision, convenience, and creativity to ancient security. Their ideas still echo in modern locks today. Roman locks were mostly bronze and iron, way tougher and sleeker than old wooden ones. They borrowed the pin bolt concept from Egypt but shrunk, fine-tuned, and sometimes totally reinvented it. Roman locksmiths made locks with internal pins that only the right-shaped key could turn and open. No cheating with lockpicks. The key had to match the internal layout perfectly, and their keys masterpieces made of iron or bronze. By the way, Roman keys came in all sizes, from giant gate keys like clubs to fancy ring keys worn on fingers like bling. Those ring keys weren't just for show, they were super handy, letting you open boxes or locks without lugging around a toolbox. Talk about flaunting power and keeping it practical. But the real genius was in Roman puzzle locks, complicated mechanisms hidden inside ornate boxes, where messing up the pins or turning a bit wrong not only kept it locked, but could jam it tighter. These babies weren't just for guarding valuables, but hiding documents, relics, even poison Roman politicians' favorite party favor. Romans even turned locks into a system banks, granaries, merchant chests, army depots all had locks. Doors had metal plates, gates had locking bars, and slaves were even chained with iron collars only masters could unlock. For Romans, locks weren't just tools, they were statements. They shouted ownership, power, exclusion, and the idea that civilized society needed more than walls to protect itself. It needed a system. While the West was crafting complex metal locks, ancient China took a practical yet philosophical path. Chinese engineers, notoriously pragmatic, developed simple, durable locks often loaded with symbolism. Locks weren't just for protection, but carried deeper meanings. The most common lock type in ancient China was the sliding bolt lock, mostly made from bronze or iron. These usually had a hollow metal box housing a spring-loaded sliding bolt. Insert the right key a flat metal bar with grooves and the latch aligned, letting the bolt slide open. Sound familiar? Yep. The basic principle of the modern pin tumbler lock was already around by the Han Dynasty, about 200 BC. Unlike fancy Roman locks with keyholes outside and elaborate decorations, Chinese locks were compact, discreet, and easy to carry. Many secured chests, gates, jewelry boxes, and doors, focusing on function over flashy looks. But Chinese locks weren't just mechanical gadgets. They were often cast as animals: tigers, dragons, turtles, or engraved with symbols for luck, protection, or wealth. A fish-shaped lock might adorn a money box, symbolizing abundance. Dragon locks on doors didn't just protect, they warned intruders. There was some serious muscle inside. Locks also played a ceremonial role in weddings. Love locks were often used to seal boxes or chests, symbolizing the couple's bond. The key was handed over during the ceremony, a gesture of trust and commitment. Some locks, especially puzzle locks, were designed to confuse thieves. They had hidden mechanisms, fake keyholes, or required secret moves to open, not because they were impossible to pick, but to buy some time. Back in the day, a little delay could mean the difference between a foiled heist and a successful one. Ultimately, Chinese security culture wasn't just about brute force prevention, but a smooth blend of practicality, symbolism, and clever design. This mix created a quiet legacy still alive in those intricate locks and symbolic rituals today. In ancient India, security relied less on muscle and more on cunning concealment, symbolic barriers, and layered protection, mixing spirituality with creativity. Indian locks weren't just about keeping strangers out. They were designed to trick, confuse, and warn, often packed with secret latches, fake stops, or engraved mantras that turned security into an almost philosophical art form. A highlight of Indian locks was their trickery. Puzzle locks and sneaky mechanisms were common in temples and treasure chests, not to totally block thieves by force, but to make lock-picking so annoying it wasn't worth the trouble. Some locks needed multiple steps: press a hidden button, twist a second lever, then finally turn the key. Others had fake keyholes just to mislead unwanted visitors. Temple security was especially sophisticated. Temples stored gold, sacred scriptures, and precious relics. Instead of just locking doors, monks layered security physically and ritually. Storage areas might be sealed with wax, tied with knotted ropes, and stamped with clay seals, each carrying spiritual weight. Breaking these seals wasn't just a crime, it was an insult to the gods. Locks were often carved with religious images: elephants, lotuses, deities, and protective chants. These weren't just to spook the superstitious, but to give the objects symbolic armor. Touching that lock without permission, that was basically giving the gods a slap in the face. In Indian courts and among merchants, compact locks protected scrolls, boxes, and private doors, usually made of iron or brass. They were light yet sturdy. Keys were highly personalized, and sometimes only one artisan made both lock and key. Absolute security was achieved by hiding. Across much of Asia, locks also played roles in weddings and inheritance. Opening a sealed chest wasn't just about grabbing treasure, but passing on trust, legacy, and responsibility. In ancient India, the best locks didn't just block, they confused, protected, and whispered. Only the right person may pass. As civilizations advanced and trade routes stretched from Rome to China, mobile security became a must. Protecting goods in merchant caravans or guarding generals' treasures meant locks couldn't just guard temple doors or houses they had to move. Trade exploded back then. Silk flooded west from China, spices poured out of India, glass, cloth, coins, and scrolls crisscrossed continents. But with wealth came risks: highway robbers, sneaky insiders, goods changing hands multiple times when owners weren't around. The fix: small, tough locks that resisted picking. Roman merchants favored small iron locks to secure chests, saddlebags, and storehouse doors. They used spring mechanisms and ring keys tough enough to fend off petty thieves, but light to carry. These locks have been found everywhere, from Britain to Syria, buried in rubble or rusted in shipwrecks. Their popularity shows a universal concern protecting mobile wealth. Chinese merchants and officials used sliding bronze locks on chests and carts. Some were cleverly disguised as decorations or built right into boxes, often engraved with marks or characters to identify the owner. If someone tampered with the lock, it was easy to spot and could mean legal trouble and serious embarrassment. Nomads in Central Asia invented leather and metal lock systems, using rings and metal clasps to secure tent doors, horse bags, and weapon boxes. Simpler, but prioritizing speed and visibility, passers-by could instantly tell if their stuff had been messed with. Meanwhile, on battlefields, locks protected armories, treasury carts, and command tents. In war, controlling access safeguarded not just resources, but information. Scrolls and maps were sometimes sealed in locked boxes, often with multi-layered locks needing several officers to open. Ancient two-factor authentication, if you will, across cultures. One thing stayed constant: the more mobile the world got, the trickier locks had to be. Opportunity came with risks, and ancient folks met those risks not just with swords, but with keys. When you twist a key or punch a code on your phone screen today. Few realize thousands of years of quiet invention are behind that simple move, but every click, every bolt, every password is part of a story that started in dusty Egyptian temples, Roman workshops, and silent trade routes linking the ancient world. The legacy of ancient locks isn't just mechanical, it's psychological. Those early inventions spoke to something deeply human, the desire to protect, exclude, and identify. What's mine is mine, whether it's a wooden latch to stop thieves, a ring key in Pompeii, or a puzzle lock in Chang'an. The ideas the same draw a line only the right people can cross. Over time, that line wasn't just physical, it turned symbolic. Temple locks didn't just guard gold, they protected the sacred. Seals on scrolls didn't just hide knowledge, they shouted authority. Even today, we use locks to mark trust-locked diaries, wedding chests, secure safes. The tech's gotten better, but the meaning's stuck in the same old groove. Honestly, sometimes the coolest thing about ancient security is how little it changed. Modern pin tumbler locks straight out of Egyptian blueprints, seals, passwords, even blockchain security today all echo the same ancient ideas: personal access, anti-tampering, symbolic control. But here's the philosophical twist. Ancient locks were never foolproof. They could be picked, broken, or bypassed just like now. But their power wasn't just in keeping people out, it was shouting boundaries. It basically screamed, "This is mine, hands off," and that psychological boundary, more than any mechanical part, is what security really is. From tombs to trade routes, temples to homes, locks were more than anti-theft devices. They were about control, identity, secrets, and sometimes survival. So next time you twist a latch or hear a safe click, remember you're not just using a tool, you're carrying on the story of kings, merchants, warriors, and priests, each trusting a tiny piece of tech to keep the world outside the door.